For now, let's move on to Thailand, where next week it will hold a constitutional referendum. If the ayes have it, Thailand will adopt its 20th constitution. Bob, what are some of the key features of the proposed constitution?
Well, it's interesting to note, first of all, Stuart, in the run-up to this, a great deal of concern on the military junta that runs Thailand that there not be, politicking ahead of this referendum in terms of opposition rallies and so forth, or even really much of a drill down on what the referendum's about. People have been jailed. There's a very tough act that was enacted, a referendum act that would put people in jail for up to 10 years for violations of this sort of blanket order of no protests and so forth. And the referendum itself makes repeated reference to efforts to cut down on corruption, and the whole referendum process has made a repeated reference to corruption and cutting down on corruption, and then this is going to stabilize Thailand and so forth. And so how would it do that? Well, it's proposing that the reintroduction of an upper house of the legislature in parliament, so a Senate, a 250-person Senate that would be appointed, not directly elected. And some members of it would be from the armed services. If it sounds like overtones of Myanmar, it is, although Myanmar seems to be moving in an opposite direction from Thailand at this point. There are also mechanisms for the Senate to have power in choosing the prime minister, and generally ways in which the military would have levers for dissolving parliament if it saw fit. Having a military holding all these levers is usually not a recipe for both stability in the long run as well as cracking down on corruption. It's just corruption of a different sort.
It does seem ironic to see the U.S. opening to Myanmar on the one hand, where things, although not hardly perfect, seem to be going in a positive direction, but obviously was considered really a rogue state or pariah state from the perspective of the United States for a while, and yet things going in a sense in the opposite direction, as you point out, in Thailand, which obviously remains a staunch U.S. treaty ally.
2 years after the military seized power in Thailand, voters are being asked to approve a new constitution, which critics say could extend the army's influence well into the future. Prime Minister Prayut Chan-o-cha suppressed political activity since the coup and banned all criticism of the new charter. Come out, because today is important for the future. Please don't think it doesn't matter, that it doesn't count whether you come to vote or not. This is for the future of the country. But Thailand's first female premier, ousted days before the coup, banned from politics for 5 years and now on trial, rejects the charter as undemocratic.
In the debates about atheism, one of the snotty, self-righteous things that atheists like to say is that the difference between science and religion is that science still matters, even if you don't believe in it. Now, sad fact is, some science still matters, even if you don't believe in it. There are actually many theoretical questions, many interesting, fascinating areas of scientific research that do not impact people's daily lives in any way, if they're unaware of them, if they don't believe in them. It's certainly possible to sleepwalk your way through life being ignorant of huge areas of scientific knowledge. And, many of them fascinating. Many of them may be rewarding to you personally to put your time into, reading as a layperson, sitting by the fireside, reading a tome on theoretical physics, or they may matter to you as part of your profession, as part of your passion in life. Maybe an area where you do original research, whoever you are watching this video. But it's a funny thing because, political science, politics, political science still matters, even if you don't care about it, even if you ignore it, even if you don't believe in it. And it still impacts your daily life anywhere you are in the world, anywhere you are that's inhabited by other human beings. You ignore it at your peril. And when you ignore it, you really are impoverishing yourself mentally, emotionally, in so many ways. This question of permanent vacation, of being a long-term expatriate in a country like Thailand, many other examples, living for years in a country where you have no contact with, no concern with political reality. It's one that I've addressed on this channel again and again. And the current events in Thailand and the total silence, the total lack of any comment from my fellow vegans living in Thailand on recent political events. I could speak for 2 hours about it, easily. unscripted. Scripted or unscripted. It's something I feel strong, but I have a lot to say about. But for this video, I want to make a very simple point only, and leave this as a short statement on the matter. This question of living in a state of voluntary ignorance, voluntary disengagement from political reality, to me, it is parallel to one of the core questions we ask in veganism. Parallel, not the same. Doesn't mean there's any point of contact between them. Parallel. As a vegan, when you talk to meat eaters, often enough, you're going to meet people who respond to the issue of animal suffering, of, the exploitation of millions of animals on an unbelievable scale, animals living their whole lives on a concrete floor in a steel cage, suffering from the day they're born to the day they die, sometimes never seeing a blue sky, etc., etc. The horrors from their conception, birth, life of exploitation, for example in the dairy industry, to their execution, to be cut up and used as food. There are people who respond to that by saying to you, and they may explain it at length, by saying to you sincerely that they just don't care. Or that they care a little bit, but they care much more about the pleasure they get from eating meat, drinking milk, etc. They care about something else more, self-indulgence of some kind. And then you as a vegan may find yourself in the awkward position of looking them in the eyes and trying to ask them to care. Right? That's the hardest thing in the world. There's an ancient Latin saying about that. I think it's velle non discitur. You can't teach the will. You can't teach them to want something. You can teach somebody facts, but you can't teach them how to want to learn. You can't teach them how to want it, whatever it is you're teaching. I can't teach you how to care, right? I can show you the facts. I can tell you what the milk industry really is, how the meat industry really works. But can I make you care about it? No. And it's a tremendously weak position to be in as a vegan, to have to be asking someone to care. If you're in Thailand for a period of a year or several years, and you just don't care, what do I do if I find myself in that position of having to look in your eyes and ask you to care? It's actually not to make Thailand a better place. It's not. It's actually inviting you to be a better person. And it's the same thing with veganism, face to face, eye to eye. On that level of one person refusing to drink milk or eat meat, there's no way you can really claim to be saving the life of an animal. It's merely symbolic. It's merely a drop in the bucket. There's no sense in which you and I and 5 of our friends are having some kind of impact on the aggregate demand for beef that's going to close down a slaughterhouse or save the life of even one cow. I wish it was true, but it's not. But what changes is you. What changes is who you are, how you see the world, and how the world sees you. And that change starts because you care. It's not the same issue. This question of politics, pure and simple, brass tacks politics, real politics, political science, and that question of caring about animal welfare, suffering, etc. It's not the same, but there is a parallel there that I can draw. And last things first, I can ask you to care, but I don't have to argue on that point, because this isn't a religion. We're not talking about things that only exist if you believe in them. We're not talking about things that only matter if you care about them. Political science is still important, even if you don't care. Consequences still count. It still matters, even if you don't care. The millions of tons of untreated sewage from pig farms and cow farms that get poured into rivers, ultimately into oceans, it still matters. Actions have consequences, whether or not you care. And on the ecological side of veganism, that's where it doesn't matter whether or not you care about the animals. It doesn't matter. Actions still have consequences. When we scale up the consequences of millions of people eating millions of animals, those consequences are truly terrifying, truly frightening to behold. And when we scale up the consequences of public indifference, of millions of people like you choosing to live in voluntary ignorance, whether it's voluntary ignorance of political reality or voluntary ignorance of ecological reality, we have a parallel.
À-bas-le-ciel.